that leveled a city block.
One of the predictions that we had made was that as we began to tighten the noose on Escobar, things would get more violent, that he would react, and he certainly did. I think we had 9 bombs in Bogota in the space of about 2 months. Hundreds of people killed.
Los Pepes responded by kidnapping and murdering Pablo's chief lawyer, Guido Parra. And when they killed Parra, they also took his teenage son and murdered him too. They hung signs around their neck that said, "What do you think of the exchange for the bombs, Pablo?" and signed them Los Pepes.
Despite allegations that Colonel Martinez is cooperating with Los Pepes, he is kept on as commander of the search block.
Colonel Martinez stood up and did the job that had to be done. Nobody else wanted to do it. A lot of people were afraid to do it.
Colonel Martinez realized that the fight between him and Pablo Escobar was a fight to the death. And at the end, either he or Pablo Escobar was going to be dead.
With Centra Spike finding no sign of Pablo's voice on the airways for months, Colonel Martinez requests the support of a Colombian ground surveillance unit.
The Colombian National Police were having a lot of success with a small unit that operated portable direction finders in collaboration with Centra Spike. And Colonel Martinez requested that this unit come to Medellin.
Martinez receives the unit, but he insists on sending one of its members back home to Bogota.
His superiors sent him to me on 2 occasions. And on both occasions, I sent him back because he bears my name.
The problem was that his own son was one of the men working in this unit.
I knew that my equipment would work and we could get good results in Medellin. But he was always resistant to my working in Medellin for my safety.
He insisted that he wanted to be involved in the search for Pablo Escobar. It had become a personal as well as familial problem that was affecting us all.
Hugo Jr. was determined to be with the unit and get Pablo Escobar before he could get him, or his sisters or brothers or his mother.
After a lot of talking, we came to the conclusion that I could stay in Medellin. We could get no more rest until we captured him.
With Escobar's family under police watch in Medellin, Pablo's own son becomes his father's front man.
He talked to Juan Pablo just about every day by radio phone, and Juan Pablo became the one person who he trusted, who he could communicate with to do his bidding with the government.
While Pablo strategizes with his son, Colonel Martinez's son tries to pinpoint the transmission.
I was very sure that I would find Pablo Escobar with this equipment.
As the hunt for Escobar gets new life, rumors continue to cloud the search block. Known members of the Medellin cartel are seen meeting with search block officers outside the search block base, including a notorious assassin.
An individual that we knew only as Don Bernardo at that time. And I'll admit, we did interview him. The Colombian National Police brought him in as an informant, and he provided information about Escobar and his associates.
It was one of those things that happened in a dirty war. There was lots of informants. I can't say, if they were part of Los Pepes or not, but there were informants.
Among those working as a secret informant for the Colombian police is Carlos Castaño.
I provided information to the police under the code name Alecos. They never knew I was Carlos Castaño, leader of the paramilitaries.
We're not afforded the luxury of having informants who are priests. Bloque de Busquets was the good guys. The narcotics traffickers were the bad guys.
Washington also becomes concerned about a possible connection between Los Pepes and Delta Force.
The tactics being employed by Los Pepes were basically the same tactics that Delta Force was in Colombia teaching to the search block.
there had been a lot of comments that the Pepes were using like tactics. From what I had heard, they were just ruthless. There's no tactics behind that shit. They just whacked people. Anyway, they were very efficient.
In Washington, the fear was not just that members of the Colombian search bloc who had been trained by Delta Force were, in fact, moonlighting as members of Los Pepes, but that Delta Force operators themselves might be participating in these hits.
November 12, 1993. The CIA briefs the Pentagon on suspicions of a connection between Delta Force and Los Pepes. A decision is made to pull all American forces from Colombia.
I did get word that we were going to be told that our military units were going to be pulled out, and I certainly didn't want that to happen.
Ambassador Busby was then able to go to work with his connections in the White House to countermand the Joint Chiefs order to remove the people from Colombia, and they stayed.
As Busby buys the search block precious time, surveillance teams continue to crisscross Medellin.
In late November of 1993, the search block, with the help of CentraSpike, was able to pinpoint Pablo's location to a hilltop finca outside Medellin.
Intelligence had been received that indicated that Escobar was hiding in a small house located on the side of a mountain out in rural areas.
When the assault forces hit the house, they burst in and Pablo wasn't there. In fact, Pablo had been talking on the radio, but he would walk up into the woods a short distance from the house so that he'd have a better line of sight communications with his son Juan Pablo in Medellin. So when the search block descended on the farmhouse, Pablo was actually up in the woods. The search block examined the farmhouse where Pablo had been staying, and it was apparent to them that the drug kingpin was living under increasingly strained circumstances.
Virtually his entire organization, the Medellin cartel, was totally destroyed.
One of the few remaining links to Pablo's empire is his son, Juan Pablo.
The Escobar family was staying in an apartment in Medellin, and the Los Pepes were sort of picking off people who worked for the family. So they were pretty terrified. Pablo is really desperate. His family is literally in the hands of his enemies.
We always had his family under watch 24 hours a day, so he could never touch our families, because if he does, his family would also perish.
He was always worried about his family's security, because that is where the Pepes concentrated their attack efforts, his family.
November 27, 1993. Scheming with his son Juan Pablo, Escobar makes a secret arrangement to evacuate his family to Germany.
And word of this, of course, gets back to the embassy, because CentraSpike is listening to all of Pablo's communications.
We learned that they were traveling on a Lufthansa flight from Bogota to Germany.
So the United States government goes to work with the Colombian government to assure that the German authorities will not allow the Escobar families into that country.
Escobar's family is refused entry into Germany and flown directly back to Colombia.
They put them up in Hotel Tequendama, which is a large hotel complex in Bogota that's actually owned by the Colombian National Police. And so while publicly they claimed to be protecting Pablo's family, the way that Pablo saw it was that his family had now fallen into the hands of the very people who were likely to kill them.
Sure enough, it wasn't a day before Escobar called. When he made the first phone call, I thought, okay, he's finished.
Once again, their efforts to get out of the country had been stopped. That's when he started making mistakes.
When Pablo Escobar begins to make phone calls to the Hotel Tequendama, we placed everybody in a state of alert.
They called the presidential palace in an effort to speak to President Gaviria, threatening to wage all-out war against the state unless they released his family and allowed them to leave Colombia to a safe haven.
He started calling everybody, and that's where he made the mistake of staying in one place too long.
And at this critical moment, the government of Colombia announces that they're going to remove the protective detail from around the Escobar family.
I mean, it was not fair to have so many Colombians at risk. and at the same time having this man with nothing to lose.
At this point, just to ratchet up the pressure on Escobar, Los Pepes made a public announcement that they were going to resume their murderous campaign against him.